this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Spring into deals for seasonal savings. Shop select one-pint annuals for just $1. Plus, get a free additional Cobalt 40-volt 2-amp-hour battery when you buy a select Cobalt 40-volt trimmer and blower combo kit. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/6. Annuals offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
Visit your nearby Lowe's on East 17th Avenue in Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Spain with a huge congratulations to WNBA top draft pick and amazing iHeart podcaster, AZ Fudd. From all of us here and your friends at Geico, we know your life is about to change. New city, new locker room, new home. It's a lot, but you're not doing it alone. You've got friends, family, and teammates. You've got all of us at iHeart Women's Sports, and you've got Geico with you every step of the way. Congrats again, AZ. Listen to AZ's podcast, Fudd Around and Find Out, wherever you listen to podcasts.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, and this episode 1096 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I know a lot of you have rookie drafts going on, so I wanted to get this episode out as soon as I possibly could. My focus has been on the Late Round Prospect Guide, which is available right now on lateround.com. It's all finished up. It has updated player write-ups and Zap scores. But now that it's out the door, my focus has shifted to this episode, and I wanted to get it out ASAP. I don't remember a draft where I was this excited to dig into the post-draft analysis. And that might seem backwards, because post-draft, rookie drafts look probably the worst they've ever looked in my time of being a fantasy football analyst. But because this draft wasn't filled with obvious talent, it means there's more to break down. It's not as simple as, this guy's really good, so draft this player. We have to think more deeply about the player that we're analyzing. We have to think more deeply about the role that he might play. And that can give an edge to the people who are putting in the work. So let's put in that work. I do this episode after the draft each year, where instead of immediately going over my rookie rankings, which again, you can find those in the Late Round Prospect Guide right now, but instead of going over those rankings, I take a step back and I try to analyze what we just watched. We get free agency, sure, but free agency, that's not a period where teams are forced to make decisions. They're forced to do things in the draft. It gives us a chance to see what they might be thinking through their actions rather than through their words. And we can get some help by analyzing those actions. If we thought a team was going to heavily invest in a running back and they chose not to take one at all, that's information. If a team had what we thought was a good wide receiver room, but they took one early, that's information. My goal today is to go over what I think these front offices were thinking when they made specific moves in this year's draft. That way we can take that information and apply it to our fantasy football leagues. So with that, let's dig in. Now, before getting into some of the individual teams, I want to share some general thoughts. We're all sitting here, we're staring at our late first round rookie picks, and we're asking ourselves how this is even possible. But how we feel about rookie drafts right now, it actually makes plenty of sense. I said time and time again on this show that this year's running back class was bad and that this year's wide receiver class just had a lot of dudes, a lot of average profiles, and that we'd probably see some of them emerge just because there were enough of them out there that we're going to get day 2 draft capital. I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Draft capital showed us that the NFL didn't like this running back class. Meanwhile, we still got a ton of wide receivers selected in the top 100. In fact, there were 17 of them in this class. That's the highest that we've seen since at least 2011. Now, I definitely don't mind most of the first round wide receivers, but the majority of them on day 2 have pretty average to below average analytical profiles. In fact, there were 7 day 2 wide receivers in this class who got tagged with a high-risk draft capital delta. The most from any other season since 2011 has been 3. We had 7 this year. And by the way, I've gotten some questions about draft capital delta this offseason. People seem to think that it has to do with pre-draft draft capital or projected draft capital versus actual draft capital. And I just want to say it has nothing to do with projected draft capital. Draft capital delta is basically how the model views a player versus how the NFL views the player. It says, okay, this guy's Zap score is X. Typically, with this draft capital, a player at that position would score X minus 2. So in that case, if he should be 2 points lower, then he'd have a positive draft capital delta. The model likes him more than the NFL did. I then bucket those players into low risk, neutral, and high risk profiles. The low risk and high risk profiles are the extreme ones. So with high risk profiles, it's saying that the ZAP model likes those players a whole lot less than where they were actually drafted. 7 day 2 wide receivers had high risk profiles, and 14 wide receivers in total had high risk profiles, the most of any season by a wide margin. But look, analytics isn't going to capture everything. The model isn't going to be 100% right. And that's part of the reason that draft capital is one of the inputs in the ZAP model. So because there are so many players with this good draft capital, someone's going to emerge, more than likely. But who that player is, that's why we feel so crappy about rookie average draft position. It's not that we don't have enough day 2 players to choose from. It's that the guys that we're choosing from are mostly uninspiring. And then some of the players that people actually liked, they didn't get the best landing spots in the world. So on one hand, I'm definitely surprised by how this bad class somehow got worse. On the other, I'm not that surprised. The numbers were kind of showing this pre-draft. The Eagles were a team who clearly needed some help at pass catcher, given A.J. Brown's eventual departure and Dallas Goedert being a free agent after this season. Goddard's also 31 years old. And they definitely got pass catchers. They took Makai Lemon in round 1. They got Eli Stowers in round 2. Both players the ZAP model likes, which seems to be a rarity in this class. Makai Lemon has a very serious slot profile. He ran almost 76% of his routes from the slot across his collegiate career, according to PFF. That's brought some fool's gold profiles in the past. Players like Elijah Moore, who had great production profiles, but they also lived in the slot. Really, the list goes on and on. It's not just Elijah Moore. But almost all of those players, aside from someone like Treylon Burks, they were not first-round picks. Since 2020, here's a list of the first-round wide receivers who had slot rates above 60% across their collegiate careers. Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Waddle, Kadarius Toney, Drake London, Treylon Burks, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Emeka Egbuka, and now Makai Lemon and Casey Concepcion. If you look at 70% or more, you get Waddle, Toney, Burks, JSN, Egbuka, and then the 2 guys from this class. And for the record, Toney was just not even close to the other guys from a production standpoint. Basically, what I'm getting at is, if a team gives a, quote, slot player first-round draft capital, it's highly unlikely that he's going to be a Jayden Reed type player in the NFL. Or at least, Jayden Reed so far in the NFL. The dream hasn't died yet, folks. Lemon definitely projects to work in the middle of the field, and from a real football perspective, I love the pairing with Devontae Smith. And it's just another reason I think Smith is in store for a big season. He can stretch the field, and he can win as he does in those intermediate and deep routes. Lemon keeps defenses honest with that lower average at the target and working that short area. The Eli Stowers pick definitely makes Lemon a little bit less attractive, though. Stowers is a pure pass-catching tight end who some believe should play X receiver. But he'll occupy some of the same areas that Lemon will, which again, good for the Eagles, bad for fantasy football. And all of that is happening while Jalen Hurts is their quarterback. Now, personnel can definitely dictate this, but Hurts avoids the middle of the field more than any other quarterback in football. According to Fantasy Points data, and this was dug up by FF Data Roma on Twitter, but according to Fantasy Points data and FF Data Roma, Jalen Hurts ranked dead last in percentage of throws to the middle of the field in 2024. He was second to last in 2025. On attempts less than 10 yards down the field, over the middle of the field, Hurts ranked 38th of 39 quarterbacks in 2024, and then 32nd of 36 in 2025. That's an area where Makai Lemon's going to thrive, or he has thrived historically. I think Lemon is a capable wide receiver, but this landing spot, it means he's got less wiggle room to hit. Like, we need to see that higher end outcome play out, or else it could get ugly. But I'm also going to trust that the Eagles and their shift in offensive coordinator, that they're aware of all of this. I don't think a smart organization makes the 2 picks that they made without an understanding that things are about to change. Nevertheless, it's something to think about. The Cleveland Browns were unbelievably frustrating in this draft as well, from the standpoint of taking players who could have been fantasy relevant and placing them on the same team. They got Casey Concepcion in round 1. They followed it up with Denzel Boston in round 2. The Zap model likes Concepcion. He actually had a very comparable Zap score compared to Lemon when it was all said and done. But Concepcion and Boston, they're now on a team with Harold Fannin, Jerry Jeudy, and Cedric Tillman, with no answer at quarterback. It's a short-term mess. Here's the thing, though. You may look at Makai Lemon and say the situation isn't that bad. And I'm actually more on the side that people are very unfair to Jalen Hurts, just in general. But right now, Hurts is not playing like a top 10 quarterback. And the Eagles, with Hurts as starter, haven't had a single season with a positive pass rate over expected. At least with Cleveland, they're probably not going to be very good this year. They'll have a shot at a quarterback next year in a good class. And then in 2027, Tillman's a free agent, and the Browns have an out with Jerry Jeudy's contract. So even if Concepcion or even if Boston have a down season, they may be able to maintain dynasty value with those changes in mind. And I think those changes are likely, not unlikely. Concepcion's also just a much cleaner prospect than Denzel Boston, in my opinion. Boston was one of those day 2 picks who was slapped with a high-risk draft capital delta. And his yards per route run profile, something that doesn't even go in the model, it's not very robust. Concepcion had a 78th percentile breakout score, and he had versatility to his profile. And if the Browns give Todd Monken more than just this 2026 season, don't forget that Monken coached Zay Flowers to some fantasy-relevant seasons in Baltimore. Flowers was also a non-traditional wide receiver on the usage front coming out of school, and Flowers was a worse prospect compared to Concepcion, in my opinion. So yeah, short term, after that Boston draft pick, it made me less bullish on Concepcion, though I do think he has a legit shot to lead that team in targets this year. And when I compare how I feel about Concepcion versus the market, I'm higher on him. And part of that is the talent profile for sure, but also I think this Browns team could look very different as early as 2027. And they knew that when they made those 2 wide receiver picks. I've got a lot more wide receiver stuff to talk about today, but let's shift our focus to running back really quick. There were a lot of teams out there this year who could have gone after a running back, but they didn't. And that means the players who were already on those rosters, they were big winners from a fantasy football perspective. Jacksonville was one of them. There were some rumors flying around pre-draft that they were really interested in Jadarian Price. But to me, if they were going to make a splash, it was likely going to be on day 3. I felt they were fairly set with their trio of Bashal Tutin, Chris Rodriguez, and LaQuinn Allen. And they didn't draft a single running back out of 10 draft picks. As I said last year, all roads lead to Bashal Tutin. The Bengals maybe could have gotten help too. They could have gone in the running back direction. But they clearly are cool with Chase Brown. He's now survived multiple drafts. I thought Chicago was another team. They could have maybe gotten a day 3 one. But this was a very big draft for Kyle Monangai. He's going to see a good amount of touches and a good offense this year, even if his receiving ceiling is kind of capped. The Texans added David Montgomery this offseason, and they didn't get a running back. Montgomery, low-key, might be a great fantasy pick this year. The Giants were rumored to be in on Jeremiah Love, and they not only didn't get him, but they didn't get a single running back in this draft, which was smart. I love the Cam Scadaboo-Tyrone Tracy combination. It makes a lot of sense as a pairing. But teams do weird things. And the Giants were, like I said, they were rumored to do one of those weird things. But it was a good draft for their running backs. And then you could also look at a team like Dallas or even Green Bay. I mean, the Packers' depth chart right now is Josh Jacobs. Okay, great. And then it's Chris Brooks, Marshawn Lloyd, who can't stay healthy, Pierre Strong, and Damian Martinez. A lot of names that we've talked about before, but no one who's really established themselves in the NFL, because Emmanuel Wilson's now in Seattle. So with those teams, it was a big win for the guys who were already there. Now, on the flip side, some of the teams who really needed running back help in this draft, Tennessee, Seattle, Washington, Minnesota, those are the teams that really come to mind. The only one of them to really spend up was Seattle. We now have Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and Damon Claiborne as big risers post-draft, given the situations that they fell to. And because this draft class is so weak, their rookie draft ADPs are soaring. And I don't even really disagree with it, given the opportunity cost involved in drafting those guys in rookie drafts. Now, I like Nick Singleton most because I thought he was the most complete running back of the 3 coming out. Katron Allen's a bruiser. He's a dog. And I definitely think that he can compete for that early down work in Washington right away, at least the goal line work. With Damon Claiborne, he's a super quick running back. He can take on some receiving work. but he's also sub 190 pounds. He's likely not going to be a bell cow. I do think he works really well in tandem with like a Jordan Mason-like player. I really wanted the Vikings, though, to get Emmett Johnson to eventually replace Aaron Jones, but Claiborne could have been worse as a fit. Singleton, though, has the high upside profile. There's a low floor, but he's big, he's athletic, and he has a good age-adjusted receiving profile. It's a great combination. And Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears could both be gone next year. They're both free agents. Now, day 3 picks, they don't work out at a high rate at all. We're not talking about Jeremiah Love here, which, by the way, I'm not going to talk about Love on today's show just because it's kind of obvious that he's going to be fantasy relevant. He's going to get a lot of work. But maybe later this week on the mailbag, someone can ask me a question about Jeremiah Love. But anyway, day 3 draft picks, they don't have a high hit rate at all. But I did do some research on this last year, and it's not surprising, but when day 3 running backs do work out as rookies, it's almost always from ambiguous backfields. In fact, in that study last year, I looked at all day 3 running backs since 2011 who gave us a particular number of top 24 and top 12 weeks. Top 24 and top 12 weekly performances. I weighted all a certain way, but it gave me a sample of 11 relevant running backs from day 3. James Robinson, Bucky Irving, Alfred Morris, Jordan Howard, Dameon Pierce, Eli Mitchell, Zach Stacy, Tyrone Tracy, Jamal Williams, and Roy Halou. And I'm defining day 3 as players picked after pick 100. Only Jordan Howard and Bucky Irving from that group had teammates drafted in the top 20 at running back in season-long leagues. The median was more like RB30, RB31, meaning the market didn't know who the top back was going to be in that backfield, at least very confidently. There was opportunity for a day 3 pick to emerge. With day 3 picks, especially day 3 running backs, and to be honest, I'm not counting round 4 in this as much as round 5, 6, and 7. But with day 3 running backs, unless the profile is just undeniable, I really am just trying to gain value from year 1 to year 2. I don't have high hopes for long-term viability. I think Emmett Johnson's profile is very, very good, so I'll still buy in there. But even the ZAP model suppresses those kinds of profiles, and it doesn't care as much as it would if that profile was selected on day 2. Emmett Johnson as a day 2 running back looks a lot better analytically than Emmett Johnson as a day 3 running back. The production metrics just don't matter as much for a day 3 back. So to put that all another way, I do think Singleton, Allen, and Claiborne should be thought about in this class. You should consider them. You have at least a shot to gain value from year 1 to year 2. And the alternatives in general in this class at wide receiver, they're just weak. The opportunity cost in drafting one of those day 3 running backs in your rookie draft is not that high. And Nick Singleton just happens to be my favorite.
Imagine winning game day before the whistle blows. With American Express as the official payments partner of the NFL, card members around the world can get used to that feeling and enjoy incredible experiences at select events all season long. Plus, with the American Express Platinum Card, you can get exclusive access to unique experiences at sporting events and concerts worldwide, getting you closer to the moments that matter. Now that's membership at its best. Terms apply. Learn more about Amex's partnership with the NFL and Premium Events Collection at go.amex/NFL.
Now, we all know women's basketball is the moment. This is Ashanti Plummer, and I'm here at iHeart. We have an amazing new podcaster who now happens to be a top WNBA draft pick. We're talking about my friend and co-host, AZ Fudd, of course. So congrats, AZ, from all of us here at iHeart and your friends over at Geico. We know your life's about to change. New city, new locker room, new home. It's exciting, and it's also a lot. But here's the thing. You're not doing it alone. Of course, you got your friends, your family, and your teammates. But you also got us here at iHeart Women's Sports, and you got Geico, who will be with you every step of the way. So while you're stepping onto a new home court, know you've already got a full bench and a gecko behind you. Congrats again to AZ Fudd. And if you're not already listening, go check out our podcast, Fudd Around and Find Out, on the iHeartRadio app or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Okay, back to the pass catchers. The Jets basically did the same thing that the Browns did, but in reverse. They got the very expensive tight end, and then they followed that up with a pretty expensive wide receiver. I mean, this just sucks all around. They took Mason Taylor last year, a guy the ZAP model really didn't like because his production wasn't that great, and he's dust now from a fantasy football perspective. Kenyon Sadiq, though, I talked about him at length on last week's show. I think he's a great prospect. And when people talk about his production profile being bad, they're really ignoring age, in my opinion. His yards per route run, it's comparable through 3 seasons to other elite tight ends in the NFL. It's just that those elite tight ends played more than 3 seasons in college. I'm optimistic that Geno Smith can be better behind a better offensive line in New York than he was in Vegas. But to expect him to sustain Garrett Wilson, Kenyon Sadiq, and Omar Cooper, who the Jets took at the end of round 1, that's a tall task. I also hate that Sadiq and Cooper, they're built for yards after the catch. So I fear that they're going to be competing a lot for targets. That's not a good thing. And then all the while, they have Breece Hall out of the backfield, who also takes a hit. But for Sadiq in particular, as Brandon Gdula noted in the prospect guide with his Sadiq write-up, offensive coordinator Frank Reich has a history of being tight end friendly. Across 10 seasons where he was the team's OC or head coach, his teams have ranked outside the top 20 in tight end target share just once. They were top 5 4 different times. So because of that and just the overall profiles, I prefer Sadiq to Omar Cooper in rookie drafts. Cooper's age-adjusted production profile is just average according to the model. I actually think the Jets offense could be okay this year, genuinely. But this is sort of like the Browns, except there's already a near elite wide receiver on that team. Now, fortunately, things can change fast, and the Jets had the draft capital for that to happen. Don't lose sight of that. I want to take a second and talk about the Dolphins and their wide receiver room. They entered the draft with Jalen Tolbert, Tutu Atwell, Malik Washington as their starting wide receivers. They needed to do something in the draft. They went out, they drafted Caleb Douglas, a shocking pick in round 3. And then they took Chris Bell, who honestly went later than I expected. And then Kevin Coleman, a slot guy, he was a day 3 pick. Coleman actually has an okay production profile, but he was pretty much only a slot player in college. I'd imagine Malik Washington gets run over him this year. So as a dart throw, he's definitely more of a taxi squad guy. Chris Bell's coming off of that ACL, but the upside is there. He's built like A.J. Brown. Just don't comp him to A.J. Brown. Bell has very average age-adjusted production. A.J. Brown's was elite. But in this draft class, I'm all for going for that upside. There's downside with literally everyone in round 2 and beyond in your rookie drafts. I don't mind Coleman. I don't mind Bell. Caleb Douglas, though, that was a head scratcher. He wasn't projected to go in the top 200 according to NFL Mock Draft Database. And it made sense as to why. Among all ZAP model wide receivers since 2020, Douglas had a 25th percentile breakout score, a 28th percentile career yards per route run rate, a 15th percentile best season yards per route run rate, and a 23rd percentile first downs per route run rate. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's just not a good analytical profile. Now, I'll talk about Douglas later to wrap things up. But to me, from an upside standpoint, Chris Bell is the clear winner here. And maybe even Devon Achane, who now has a better shot at maintaining his crazy high target share. Now, speaking of wide receiver investments, there were teams who didn't invest in the position that was really surprising to me, especially given all the day 2 draft picks at wide receiver. The Patriots didn't take a single wide receiver, another hint that A.J. Brown could be coming their way. They did take an interesting tight end prospect, 95th overall, though, in Eli Raritan. Minnesota could have taken one, but they didn't either. But there are 2 teams where I kind of was shocked by their level of investment. The first was the Raiders. They had an opportunity to take Elijah Surratt in round 4, and they passed on him to start that round. Surratt looks good in the ZAP model compared to draft capital, and he comped to a lot of big slot wide receivers, like a Michael Thomas type. And it sounds like Baltimore sees that too, based on some of the quotes post-draft. That could be really fun for Elijah Surratt. But Surratt played with Fernando Mendoza last year. He was Mendoza's contested catch guy. And the Raiders didn't get him despite their starting wide receivers entering the draft being Trey Tucker, Jalen Naylor, and Jack Besh. They did get Malik Benson later in the draft, but he's mostly a deep threat. Honestly, I don't see the allure of him with Trey Tucker on your roster. So that was a surprise for sure. Brock Bowers is probably going to be fed this year. And then there's the Colts. I recently did a Reddit AMA, and someone asked me what the last trade that I had done in Dynasty was. This was pre-draft, and the trade that I called out was that I sent the 208 in a rookie draft for Josh Downs, which today, I'm feeling great about that. I had mentioned Downs being an interesting buy candidate earlier in the offseason, with there being an off chance that the Colts didn't do much to invest in wide receiver. And they didn't. They only took Deion Burks in the last round, someone who profiles as a slot. Josh Downs is better than Deion Burks. That means that at this moment, in 2 wide receiver sets for Indianapolis, Josh Downs is competing with Nick Westbrook-Akine. I've said for a while that I think Downs can handle that, and now he should get that opportunity. Though there are still some useful veterans out there that the Colts could sign. Overall, though, I do think this was a sign that the Colts are ready for Josh Downs to take a bigger role in that offense. I'm crossing my fingers that this is finally the year that we see our favorite slot guys get more reps. Those guys being Josh Downs and Jayden Reed. The Saints just went all in on Tyler Shough. I'm all about it. When you have a player like Shough who's potentially borderline, like you don't know for sure that he's the absolute future, you surround him with weapons. Give him everything that you can so you can properly evaluate him without many excuses. So what did the Saints do? They get the wide receiver 1 in the Zap model and Jordan Tyson in the top 10. Matt Harmon's reception perception had Tyson as a huge zone beater, and Olave is great against man. And Tyson's going to eat up a lot of those intermediate throws from Shough in a fast-paced Kellen Moore offense. I love the fit. They then get Oscar Delp, who's a crazy athlete. He did have a questionable production profile, but Delp has a lot of upside at tight end. And then they took another crazy athlete on day 3 in Bryce Lance. Lance is going to stretch the field vertically, and he fits a bigger bodied mold at wide receiver that they don't have a ton in with Chris Olave and Jordan Tyson. Lance has serious red flags to his profile, but he's big, he's athletic, and you can't deny him that. I like the fits here overall, and the offense is friendly for fantasy given the way that Kellen Moore calls plays. Keep in mind, too, the Saints ran 11 personnel at the 5th highest rate in the league last year. I don't think that's going to change that much given these investments. Back in January, I did my sell candidates episode, and RJ Harvey was on that list. He was a sell candidate. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm just going to be open and transparent. Maybe I'm going to come in with the takes today and be a little bit biased. I hope not. I hope that's not the case. I try to think rationally about this stuff, but I've been lower on RJ Harvey throughout this offseason, so keep that in mind. But I do think that Harvey's dynasty value took a serious hit when the Broncos drafted Jonah Coleman this past weekend. The Zap model did not love RJ Harvey. He had a high-risk profile. He was older, and his age-adjusted production, it was fine, but not amazing. I just didn't see him as a bell cow back, as an obvious bell cow. And I wrote about that, and I talked about that at the start of the offseason. And now I think it's pretty clear. He's not a bell cow back. Jonah Coleman enters Denver, and Coleman, he's looked at pretty favorably by the Zap model. Outside of Jeremiah Love, the model really liked Emmett Johnson, Jonah Coleman, and to a lesser extent, Nick Singleton from this class. 2 of the 3 got pretty good landing spots. And then Johnson's isn't terrible either. But look, I don't think it's all that crazy to at least ask yourself if Jonah Coleman is the better prospect between himself and RJ Harvey. We obviously now have a year of NFL experience for Harvey, but he was also 3rd worst among 48 qualified running backs last year in rushing yards over expected per attempt. Harvey found the end zone a lot. He looked fine as a pass catcher, but it was not some incredible season from him. So I asked this question to myself and to Prospect Guide readers. With Jonah Coleman, is he actually the better prospect compared to RJ Harvey? Now the Zap model sides with Harvey, but that's simply because of draft capital. I think it's closer than we probably realize. In terms of Zap model inputs, Coleman has a better prorated reception share and adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt. Harvey, he bested him in adjusted total yards per team play in his best season. The advanced numbers are sort of a mixed bag. Coleman was an 89th percentile player in yards after contact per attempt. Harvey was 66th percentile. Harvey and Coleman avoided tackles at a near identical rate, and both were great at it in college. And then Harvey admittedly is more explosive. That's a big differentiator between Coleman and RJ Harvey. But I don't know, man. I think that Jonah Coleman could step in and at the very least be part of a committee and be maybe the goal line back. He's the same height as RJ Harvey, but Coleman weighs 15 more pounds. He's just a legitimate do-it-all back. He may not do one thing in a very elite way, but he does everything well. I think we see a 3-headed backfield this year with the 2 of them and J.K. Dobbins. And if Coleman shows us something, which I think is very possible, I would not be shocked if he's looked at more favorably than RJ Harvey in the dynasty market as we enter the 2027 season. Keep in mind too, Coleman's entering the league before turning 23 years old. RJ Harvey was 24 years old when he was drafted. That's not irrelevant here. So I think Coleman is the clear RB3 in this class. And I don't think Denver makes a move like that if they're totally secure with RJ Harvey being the workhorse. In typical Sean Payton form, we're probably going to see a committee. The last thing that I want to get to today is a topic that everyone seems to be talking about on social media right now, which is reaches, comparing actual draft capital to consensus draft boards. I did an episode on this actually last year, episode 977. I shared results of a study where I looked at NFL mock draft database data and compared it to where players were actually drafted. And instead of just looking at the raw number of picks that were different, like instead of just saying, this guy was drafted 100th overall, but the big board said 120, so that's a 20 pick difference. I used pick value. And that value was derived from Chase Stewart's draft pick value chart. That chart was designed to say that pick 1 is worth X in value, pick 2 is worth X minus Y. Pick 3 is then worse than that, and then pick 4, etc., etc. So realistically, if a player was projected to go 9th overall, he ends up going 3rd overall, that's a much more significant jump than if he was projected to go 120th overall and he went 100th overall. From a fantasy football perspective, I have found that reaches generally matter, at least at wide receiver. The mock draft data goes back to 2016. And since that point in time, there have been 15 wide receivers who have had a chance to play 3 years in the NFL, whose teams lost 4 or more points in value when drafting them. They're the 15 biggest reaches at wide receiver from 2016 through 2023, essentially. Of those 15, just 5 were able to outproduce their expected B2S. B2S is a metric that I use in the ZAP model that represents a player's best 2 seasons PPR points per game output across his first 3 years in the league. It takes his best 2 seasons and averages them together. That's why I'm looking at players who have played at least 3 years in the NFL. I can look at history to see what type of B2S we'd expect from a wide receiver at a particular draft slot. And historically, players who are this big of reaches, they've underperformed versus expectation. Only 5 of 15 didn't. And only 3 of those players outperformed their B2S expectation by 1 or more PPR point. Those 3 were Deontay Johnson, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Kenny Golladay. What's interesting is that we've had more of these players show up over the last couple of drafts. Pat Bryant, Chimere Dike, Arian Smith, Isaac TeSlaa from last year's draft. And then from this year's, you get Carnell Tate just because he was drafted so early and those picks are so valuable. But even if you want to throw him out, Caleb Douglas, Dazon Stribling, Xavier Thomas, and Caden Weegan. Now it does get better beyond that 4 points in value lost for NFL teams. And maybe this is just small sample size noise. We have to be open about that. But I do think that we've seen reaching for wide receivers be a bad thing historically. Now at running back, it hasn't been as bad at the extremes. But we've often seen some big misses at the position when teams reach, which scares me about Kaelon Black. He went to San Francisco on day 2. This isn't new for Kyle Shanahan. Since he got to San Francisco, he's now drafted 3 of the 8 biggest reaches at running back in the ZAP model database. You had Ty Davis Price as the 2nd biggest reach, Black as the 6th biggest, and then Joe Williams as the 8th biggest. And if you remove round 1 running backs because Ezekiel Elliott and Jahmyr Gibbs are on that list, those San Francisco running backs are 3 of the top 6 reaches at running back in ZAP model history. He's also now drafted those 3 running backs, Jordan James, Isaac Orendo, Trey Sermon, and Elijah Mitchell, since he got to San Francisco. Those are the running backs that he's taken. So yes, Kaelon Black, he got great draft capital, but the profile is still lacking, and the reach aspect of things doesn't make me feel that much better, especially given the history in San Francisco. But I feel even worse about the wide receivers. At least with running back, a coach can just throw a guy on the field and let him go. That's why running back doesn't get as much signal with reaches probably. Wide receivers have to get open and earn those targets. It's not just about running routes. And this year we're looking at Caleb Douglas, Dazon Stribling, and Xavier Thomas as the 3 biggest reaches outside of round 1. all three have profiles with a lot of age-adjusted red flags. I'm not surprised that we saw some reaches at wide receiver in this draft. Bringing it all full circle, the draft had a lot of average wide receiver profiles. So teams are going to be all over the place with their evaluations. I think it's just important to not necessarily treat those three wide receivers at face value. Don't assume their draft capital is totally accurate. Because historically, the combination of poor age-adjusted production and being a huge reach in the draft, it's meant underwhelming fantasy results. That makes me nervous about those three wide receivers being huge fantasy football hits. Though to be fair, I think the dynasty market feels the exact same way. So it doesn't mean that I'm avoiding those players. It just means I wouldn't spend up on them. So those are my general thoughts on what went down over the weekend. There's so much more to talk about that I didn't even get to, but I wanted to touch on the things that I found most interesting. You can always read more about my thoughts on this class by checking out the Late Round Prospect Guide. That's found on lateround.com. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. We've got the Late Round Show on Wednesday on YouTube and then a mailbag episode later this week. I'll talk to you then.
This is Sarah Spain with a huge congratulations to WNBA top draft pick and amazing iHeart podcaster, AZ Fudd. From all of us here and your friends at Geico, we know your life is about to change. New city, new locker room, new home. It's a lot, but you're not doing it alone. You've got friends, family, and teammates. You've got all of us at iHeart Women's Sports, and you've got Geico with you every step of the way. Congrats again, AZ. Listen to AZ's podcast, Fudd Around and Find Out, wherever you listen to podcasts.
At CVS, it matters that we're not just in your community, but that we're part of it. It matters that we're here for you when you need us, day or night. And we want everyone to feel welcomed and rewarded. It matters that CVS is here to fill your prescriptions and here to fill your craving for a tasty and, healthy snack. At CVS, we're proud to serve your community because we believe where you get your medicine matters. So visit us at cvs.com or just come by our store. We can't wait to meet you. Store hours vary by location.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.